going to share her presentations with us today. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to our guest speaker. Jane?
Thank you, Rosine, for the introduction. Welcome to this session, Practical Application of AI, Evaluating Music to Build a Music Library. Again, my name is Jane Gilvin. We are recording the session, so you can come back to review it or to share with other folks that you think might be interested. Today's conference is brought to you by the San Jose State University School of Information and support from the Future of AI. Today, we'll be discussing how my team and I used AI to automate identifying instrumental and vocal music in order to build our digital music library faster. I'm not going to be going into a lot of the technical details, as that was handled by another member of our team, the software developer, who is no longer on our team. Again, my name's Jane Gilvin, and I'm with NPR's Research, Archives, and Data team. A little bit about myself. I've been with the RAD team, as we like to call ourselves, close to 13 years, and my educational background is in music and library science, and I've previously worked in radio on and off since I was a teenager, and I know a lot of people have connections to San Jose State, and I am also alumni of their information science program. And now I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the RAD team and our music collection. The RAD team was formerly known as the library, and our department stretches back to the founding of NPR in the 1970s. We're responsible for collecting the archive of NPR programming, but also providing resources for production, including a music collection. Our earliest music collections were records, of course, and I pulled some examples from the late 70s and 80s. These are ones that I tend to find a little fun. The soundtracks to Empire Strikes Back and Gone with the Wind, and the 2 copies of Michael Jackson's Thriller that we had. And those were actually checked out in the late aughts in 2007 and 2009, well after we converted most of the library to CDs. So the vinyl still remained popular for some folks. And if you zoom in really closely on the checkout card for the Gone with the Wind record, you might recognize a certain name from the program This American Life. As NPR grew, so did the catalog. We amassed records across many genres, all with the focus of what would help show directors, producers, and editors create the broadcast shows, such as All Things Considered and Morning Edition. That meant a lot of instrumental music for the breaks between pieces, music that was featured in reviews and performances. The RAD team had a database with records of all the cataloged music, and we used a somewhat idiosyncratic call number system to both shelve and recall the records. Librarians used to listen to each record to apply metadata like genre, keywords, and an instrumental or vocal classification tag. As the consumer market changed from records to 8 tracks to cassette tapes, the library stayed with vinyl records until compact discs and CD players became more standard in our production process. At that point, a new collection basically had to be built. Some of the same albums NPR had on vinyl had to be bought on CD, as well as collecting new music on CD. After that, the next big technological shift was digital music files. As staff got more and more used to downloading music from iTunes or other providers, both in their personal and professional life, listening to music on YouTube or blogs, and even NPR's own site, expectations changed for how quickly they could access music and where they could access music. Coinciding with the shift in behavior was NPR's planned move to a completely new building. The production workflows in the new building were planned to be, if not exclusively digital, mostly digital. This presented both an opportunity and a problem for the RAD team: how to convert thousands of records for physical CDs from our database into digital files that were ready to download at a production computer. Enter the robot. The robot was capable of batch ripping CDs, identifying metadata from online databases, and delivering MP3 and WAV files with the metadata embedded into ID3 tags on the MP3 file. Working with some of our system administrators and software developers, as well as other technical staff like designers and researchers, NPR built Orpheus. A new database where you could search, stream, and download songs for production. This meant that you no longer had to come down to the RAD collection room and find CDs. As an example, I pulled up a search for Thelonious Monk, for which you get over 600 tracks that you can mostly audition at your desk and listen to. So I'm going to choose a track to listen to. So as production staff, you could listen to the music at your own desk, decide which piece you wanted to use, and then you could go into the record to download a file. And within a few minutes, you're going to have a WAV file on your desktop or wherever you've downloaded in order to use in your production workflow. So in anticipation of the move, a specialized team of music librarians, including myself and 3 others, as well as multiple interns, worked to batch rip CDs, correct and enhance the metadata, and shelve the digitized and catalog CDs. By the time NPR moved buildings, Orpheus had roughly 300,000 digitized tracks ready for use. Problem solved, right? Not exactly. Sure, we'd worked through most of the current collection of CDs that production staff relied on for producing their programs. Most, but not all, as you can see from the picture of some of the CDs that we were not able to rip and digitize. And also, the producers and other production staff were still receiving new CDs daily, as well as digital files to audition and potentially use in programming. We had no plan and no resources to continue the large-scale ingest and cataloging of music that this influx of new music, both physical and digital, called for. Lucky for our users, there were already many places to listen to music, but Orpheus was still really the best place to come to find specifically instrumental music. Most streaming and downloading services assume a song is vocal, and very few performers or publishers mark it in the metadata otherwise, unless the intent is for use in karaoke or other types of activities. We discussed a lot of options for how to get more music into the system, but we kept running into the problem of how to mark every track as instrumental or vocal, if that meant that a person had to listen to the majority of the track each time. So, what to do? While researching trends in the music information retrieval field, referred to as the MIR field, I came across Essentia. And Essentia is an open source library and collection of tools that's used to analyze audio and music to produce descriptions and synthesis of it. Their collection of algorithms can help predict genre, beats per minute, dance type, mood, and more. All of the algorithms were of interest to us because any kind of descriptive metadata can be helpful for production staff as they're trying to find the correct piece to use. But what was of most interest to us was the algorithm that predicted whether or not a track was instrumental or vocal. Having that work automated would cut down on the most work-intensive part of our music cataloging process, and it would also give our users a reliable point of data. One of the downsides of the algorithms was that they're trained on small sets of data, so they might not be very accurate if they're applied to genres or styles of music that were not included in the training set. A lot of the researchers that work in the MIR field, especially that are able to build and release open source tools, they're hampered by not having access to large data sets because of legal permissions and other limitations. But in that, the RAD team actually had a bit of an advantage. Our database, Orpheus, has 30 plus years of data on instrumental and vocal tracks. I'm going to give you a few examples of that. So we have nearly 300 tracks that feature David Bowie's music, either as composer, performer, or otherwise involved, and they're tagged as vocal or instrumental. So you can come to Orpheus and find that. So let's go with an an instrumental one from this soundtrack. And an example that came up actually earlier this month was a request for the Brady Bunch theme song, but an instrumental version. So we did have this one. Which is pretty fun to have in the collection for people to discover. So we had over 300,000 tracks that were digitized and marked as instrumental or vocal, and we could use as many of these as we needed to train the algorithm. Accuracy, of course, was our main goal in applying this. To determine how accurate we required, we first had to figure out how accurate that our highly prized manual human cataloging had been. We knew, of course, it was not going to be 100% because of human error, but how close to 100% would it be, and how used to that accuracy were our users? So depending on genre, the accuracy ranged from 90 to 98%, with the average being about 90%. This told us that our users already accepted some amount of error, and since our previous user research had told us that new music in Orpheus was a priority, and a lack thereof was one reason users turned to other systems, we felt that 80% accuracy from the algorithm would be an acceptable accuracy rate that would maximize the amount of new tracks that we could add into the system and ingest, but that would also balance the usefulness of the instrumental and vocal tag for users. We don't want it so unreliable that people no longer believe it, but we also don't want a process that is harder to do than the manual process. We want something that would save us time. So we selected tracks from each genre to train the algorithm on, and then we tested the accuracy of the new tracks that were assessed by the algorithm. Overall, we found the algorithm correctly assessed tracks as instrumental or vocal 86% of the time. This met our criteria and actually comes pretty close to our human assessment of 90%. So our next steps were how to build it into the ingest process and to apply it to the already existing tracks that maybe had not been cataloged previously and perform QC. So we gratefully did not encounter any large impediments in that process of building it into the ingest and applying it to already existing tracks. And we also added an additional feature so that users could report to us when a song was incorrectly marked. And I will show that to you now. So for example, on this track, which is actually a vocal track, it's just spoken word. It's Sheldon Harnick reflecting on Fiddler on the Roof. It's marked as not instrumental, but if it had been marked incorrectly, a user could use this small X and this will open up an email to us. Oh, you know what? I don't have my Outlook open. If Outlook was open, it would pop up with an Outlook email that in the, here we go, in the subject, it's got the name of the track and what it's incorrectly tagged as, and then also has the URL for the Orpheus team to go directly to, and then to edit the track and correct the metadata. We also have an automated spreadsheet that is also sent to the same shared email for the Orpheus team whenever we apply the algorithm. That lets us review the results right away so that we can do kind of a quick layer of QC. So if we know we've ingested an album that should largely be instrumental and we get that spreadsheet and it's showing as mostly vocal, we know something has gone wrong and we need to take a look at it. So I'm now going to demonstrate how this works as a user who's ingesting new tracks, and we'll take a look at what the results are. So I've already uploaded 5 albums here, and this is our search results of everything that I've uploaded today. So there's 5 different albums with varying numbers of tracks on it. And right now, because I have not run the algorithm on it, everything is going to be listed as vocal. So under the instrumental column, it all says no. We scroll all the way down. So I'm now going to show you how we do the ingest. So I'm going to go to one of our admin pages. This is where we ingest different types of files. We can ingest MP3s, M4A, and WAV files directly. And our other tools down here, and the last one is our Essentia instrumental tagging. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. And I'm going to do a little bit of vamping and talk about the system a little bit more before we go back and review the results, because it does take a little bit of processing time. We do have an admin side to this that allows us a fair amount of leeway in editing the metadata and correcting the metadata. Currently, we use all the metadata that comes with the files. We mostly receive files either directly from artists or their publicists or their labels to ingest into Orpheus. And so that's usually created with the metadata by the label, or we receive purchase tracks from iTunes or Amazon, which then have the metadata embedded within the file that Orpheus can read. And as I'm sure lots of you all who have used digital files before or streamed music, that the metadata ranges from correct to incorrect all the time. So let's go back to that search. And I know in the albums that I ingested, of the 5 albums, 2 of them should be majority instrumental, and that includes the Jennifer Coe album Alone Together. And I believe there is, yes, there's a Ravi Shankar album, The Sounds of India. Should be mostly instrumental, not entirely, but mostly. And then the other albums, The Past is Still Alive from Hooray for the Riff Raff, On Top of the Covers by T-Pain. And there's one other album in here that I think just has 1 track. That should be majority vocal. So we're looking for some of this to change, but not all of it. And I'm going to refresh and we'll take a look. All right. So we can see we've got a few here actually from the albums that we expect to be majority vocal that are listed as instrumental. And so far, a lot of the tracks from the instrumental ones are not marked as instrumental, which as I scroll down and see more no's makes me think that the processing hasn't run through on those and will later. But for now, let's take a look at these 2 tracks and see if it's correct or not.
Harlan, there is your puppy. I want to congratulate you. It was wonderful.
That one's interesting because it is largely instrumental music, but there is vocal over it. I will go back and change this at some point because I do think that's kind of incorrect, but let's give a listen to the other one. So it sounds like the majority of that track is instrumental, so that was correct. So that is one example of how the algorithm works for us. And want to go on to thank you all for listening. And this is how we approached using AI so that we could develop a less time-consuming ingest and cataloging process, so that we could keep adding to our music library even as our staff time was limited. And now I'm happy to open it up for questions and answer any I can, the best I can.
Thank you very much, Jane, for sharing your expertise and insights about cataloging with AI today. And that was very stimulating discussion, exploring the practical applications of AI and how for evaluating music to build music libraries. So do you have any questions? I'm checking the chats. Please feel free to just have your mic on and ask your question or put on the chat. Actually, I have a question. So are there any copyright and licensing considerations when collecting music data?
Yes, there are a lot. Because we are a distributor and creator of broadcast content, we do have licenses with the major performing rights organizations for the use of the music. So that's a little different than a lot of other libraries might have that are going to have more of a educational or community bent. So if you're considering building a music collection, especially digital collection, you should review that and make sure that you're staying within the terms of use.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So another question I have is about the data, how you train the data model, and what can be the downside implication in the long run.
I mean, there's a few different things. Anytime you're training an algorithm on data, it's going to be trained on any errors that are included in that or any bias that's included in that. So in our instance, we knew that our tracks were not 100% correct. So we did risk training the algorithm incorrectly in some instances. We also do have a large collection. And we have many genres, but there are some genres that we have a better collection and a more wide-ranging collection in than others. For example, our jazz and classical sections are quite large and cover, decades and centuries of music, whereas some of our pop and our hip hop collections are much smaller. And when you're going to use that amount of data, it's going to affect the output of it. One thing we did end up doing that I think kind of ameliorated some of that was that we didn't use our entire catalog to train the algorithm on. We took a selection from each genre. So we weren't weighting the algorithm more heavily in one genre than in another. I think anytime you're thinking about using an algorithm in cataloging or any kind of automation, really, you have to really examine critically how it's been cataloged in the past and see if there are things that you want to make sure you're not replicating or even things that you're trying to correct for.
Mm-hmm. And you have mentioned the QC, QA, QC. You are performing QA, QC projects on an ongoing basis. Do you also do data labeling projects for that?
Not a ton of data labeling, and I will say our QC and QA processes on the music currently are not as intensive as they used to be when we were first implementing the algorithm. I do try and take a look at recent output from the algorithm to see if it's changed any, either because the type of music we're ingesting has changed some, or if the algorithm itself is sort of shifting away from its original training, because you can't always go back and retrain the algorithm. So want to make sure that we're still staying within that 80% or higher range of accuracy. And then the other part of QC that we try and do is looking at that automated spreadsheet I mentioned, and we just try and kind of glance over that to make sure that it kind of looks right to us and that nothing is sticking out, so that there's not, if we've just ingested like a new track that we know is vocal, like a new Beyonce track that we know she sings on and it's being marked as instrumental, like that's going to stand out to us. We have a little bit of an impediment in that right now because that part of the process is broken. And we just recently hired a new developer who's going to be onboarded soon. So that will hopefully get fixed relatively soon.
Mhm. This is so insightful. And what kind of user testing or UX projects are you considering to improve data research?
That's a really good question. We right now don't really have any on our roadmap for Orpheus because we are focused on a slightly different project right now. But when we get back to it, I want to revisit some of the other algorithms we've used from the open source library at Essentia. We've tested them in the past, one for timbre, and that one was really fun because the way the algorithm produce the output is it gave you basically kind of a range. I think it was between like 1 and 10, from sort of a light timbre to like a very dark timbre. So something kind of light and floaty to something like very bass heavy and very dark. And we had created a music mood taxonomy. And so we sort of broke up parts of the taxonomy across that kind of range. And then to test the algorithm, we ran it on some tracks, and depending on kind of what tranche it landed in within the algorithm, we then applied some of our mood taxonomy, and we sent that out to users to sort of get their feedback on like, if you searched on this term, if you searched for a dark, sad song and you got this result, would that meet your expectations or not? So that was a really fun project and interesting, and I'm hoping we can get back to something like that, to implementing the ones we've already tested and testing new ones.
This is so great to see that your digital assets and taxonomy initiatives are working in your benefits for using AI and LLMs in the future. That's great progress in the music field. Thank you very much for sharing and your insights. As we come to an end of our presentation, I want to express my sincere gratitude to Jane Gilvin for your presentation and information. And that was very engaging. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Bye-bye.